Picture this. A lonely stretch of highway in West Virginia, November 1966. The kind of road where your headlights are the only thing between you and complete darkness. Now imagine seeing a figure standing on the side of that road, perfectly still, wearing what looks like a metallic green suit. And when your headlights hit his face, you see it. That smile. Wide, unmoving, stretching from ear to ear like it was carved into his skull. That was Indrid Cold, the Grinning Man, one of the most unsettling figures in American folklore. For decades, people whispered about him in the same breath as the Mothman, another creature that haunted Point Pleasant during those strange months. But here's the thing. Everything you think you know about Indrid Cold is wrong. Because on a frigid night in January 2024, a former journalist named David Marsh encountered something that changed the entire story. He didn't find the Grinning Man standing confidently on a dark road. He found him hiding in an abandoned radio tower, shaking, terrified, his iconic smile cracked and broken like a porcelain mask that had been dropped. And when David got close enough, Indrid Cold did something no one ever reported before. He spoke. Not telepathically, not through that eerie mental communication witnesses described in the 60s. He actually spoke, his voice hoarse and desperate. He said 3 words that made David's blood run cold. "Help me please." That was the night Indrid Cold stopped smiling and started talking. To understand what happened that night, we need to go back. Way back. November 2, 1966, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. A salesman named Woodrow Derenberger was driving home late when a strange vehicle forced him off the road. Not a car, not a truck, something that looked like a flattened lampshade made of dark metal, hovering just above the asphalt. The craft's door opened, and out stepped a man in his 40s, dark hair slicked back, wearing a shimmering suit that caught the moonlight. But what Woodrow remembered most was the smile. It never moved. Never wavered. It was like looking at a photograph of happiness that had been stretched too wide. The man approached Woodrow's window and, without moving his lips, introduced himself. "I am Indrid Cold. Do not be afraid." Woodrow reported feeling the words inside his head, warm and reassuring, yet somehow invasive. Over the following weeks, Indrid Cold appeared to several residents of Point Pleasant. He was always polite, always smiling, always communicating telepathically. He asked mundane questions about human life, showed interest in everyday activities, and never displayed aggression. But he also showed up during the same period as the Mothman sightings, those terrifying encounters with a winged creature with glowing red eyes that stalked the TNT area outside town. Then came December 15, 1967. The Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. After that tragedy, both the Mothman and Indrid Cold vanished. Researchers connected the dots. They theorized these entities were harbingers of disaster, interdimensional travelers, or extraterrestrial observers studying humanity. Some even compared Indrid Cold to the Men in Black, those mysterious figures who allegedly silence UFO witnesses. Imagine if a Men in Black salesman got possessed by a used car dealer's smile and decided to take up door-to-door telepathy. That's Indrid Cold in pop culture terms. But here's what most people don't know. In the decades after 1967, there were scattered, unconfirmed reports of the Grinning Man appearing in remote locations. Rural Canada in 1983. The Australian outback in 1995. Northern Finland in 2008. Each time, witnesses described the same metallic suit, the same frozen smile. But these reports had something new. They mentioned fear in his eyes. Not menace. Terror. Most paranormal researchers dismissed these accounts as copycat stories or misidentifications. After all, why would Indrid Cold, this enigmatic cosmic visitor, suddenly seem frightened? Enter David Marsh. Born in Point Pleasant in 1985, David grew up hearing stories about the Mothman and the Grinning Man from his grandmother, who had been one of the bridge collapse survivors. As an adult, David became an investigative journalist specializing in debunking paranormal claims. He had a reputation for being thorough, skeptical, and absolutely ruthless with pseudoscience. By 2023, David had left journalism after a messy controversy involving a politician he'd exposed. He returned to Point Pleasant, bitter and broke, taking odd jobs and nursing old grudges. But he never stopped being curious. In December 2023, David started noticing something strange. Multiple reports on obscure internet forums about electromagnetic interference in the forests surrounding Point Pleasant. Radio equipment failing. GPS devices spinning. Cell phones displaying impossible timestamps. Old-timers in town whispered that it felt like 1966 all over again. David initially dismissed it as mass hysteria or a viral hoax. But then his own phone started acting up. Text messages appeared from numbers that didn't exist. Voice memos recorded conversations he never had. Photos in his gallery showed places he'd never visited. All of them featured the same location in the background. An abandoned radio tower deep in the woods, about 15 miles from the old TNT area. On January 8, 2024, David decided to investigate. He packed his gear, grabbed a flashlight and his grandfather's old tape recorder, and headed into the forest. He told himself he was just satisfying his curiosity. Deep down, though, he knew something was pulling him there. Something that wanted to be found. The radio tower stood like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. Rust covered most of its surface, and the surrounding clearing was overgrown with dead grass and skeletal trees. David felt the air shift as he approached. It was January, freezing cold, but the temperature around the tower seemed even lower, as if the structure itself was radiating cold. His breath came out in thick clouds. His phone died instantly. No warning, no low battery notification. Just black. His flashlight flickered. The tape recorder started spinning on its own, playing static mixed with fragments of voices speaking backwards. David's training as a journalist kicked in. He started documenting everything, speaking into the recorder even though he wasn't sure it was actually recording. The audio is distorted. I'm hearing something that sounds like breathing. Not human. It's too rhythmic. Too deliberate. He circled the tower, looking for an entry point. The door was rusted shut, but one of the lower windows had been shattered. David climbed through, careful not to cut himself on the jagged glass. Inside, the tower was a tomb of obsolete technology. Old radio equipment covered in dust. Wires hanging from the ceiling like dead vines. And in the center of the room, sitting on the floor with his back against a concrete pillar, was Indrid Cold. David froze. He'd seen the drawings, the sketches from the 60s. But nothing prepared him for the reality. Indrid Cold looked human, almost painfully so, except for small details that screamed wrong. His suit was indeed metallic, shimmering green and silver, but it was torn in places, exposing what looked like pale skin underneath. His dark hair was disheveled. His hands were shaking. And his face. Oh God, his face. The smile was there, but it was wrong. It trembled. The corners of his mouth twitched like they were fighting against the expression. His eyes, large and dark, were filled with something David had never expected to see in an alien entity. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. Indrid Cold looked up at David, and for the first time in recorded history, the Grinning Man's smile faltered. It cracked, literally cracked, like a mask breaking apart. And beneath it, David saw something that looked almost human. Almost. The voice came, not from Indrid's mouth, but from inside David's head. It was weak, fragmented, nothing like the confident telepathy Woodrow Derenberger had described. Help. Wrong place. Wrong smile. They find me here. David wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to get out of that tower, To leave this thing behind and never look back. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the journalist in him, the part that always needed to know the truth. Or maybe it was something simpler. Indrid Cold wasn't acting like a predator. He was acting like prey. David forced himself to speak. "Who are you running from?" The response came faster this time, more coherent. "The others. They wear smiles. Not like me. They wear them wrong. They hunt. They take. I ran. They followed." The tape recorder suddenly whirred to life, playing a sound that made David's skin crawl. It was laughter, but distorted, layered with dozens of voices at once, all laughing in perfect synchronization. Indrid Cold's eyes widened. He scrambled to his feet, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "They close. You must go." David didn't move. Something about this felt important, like he was standing at the edge of a revelation that could change everything. He pulled out his notebook, the old-fashioned kind he'd carried since his first journalism job. "If you want me to help, you need to explain. What are you? What are the others?" Indrid Cold looked at him for a long moment. The broken smile finally fell away completely, replaced by an expression of profound sadness. "I am observer. We come to watch, to learn. My people, we communicate with faces. Smiles mean peace, trust, safety. But they, the others, they learn wrong. They use smiles to deceive. To control. They make humans see happiness when there is danger. They feed on confusion, on fear hidden behind false comfort. I tried to stop them. I failed. Now they hunt me." The temperature dropped further. David could see his breath crystallizing in the air. The walls of the tower began to hum, a low frequency that made his teeth ache. Indrid Cold backed toward the broken window. "You should not have come. Now they know, you see. They will come for you too." Before David could respond, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that meant something was listening. Indrid Cold's eyes locked onto something behind David. His broken smile tried to reform, a defensive gesture, but it only made it halfway. "Run, David. Run now." David turned. Standing in the doorway of the tower were three figures. They wore suits identical to Indrid Cold's, shimmering and metallic. They had the same dark hair, the same pale skin. But their smiles. Oh God, their smiles were perfect. Too perfect. Wide and gleaming, stretching impossibly across their faces, never moving, never changing. And their eyes were completely empty. David's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. These weren't aliens trying to look human. These were things that had studied humanity like a textbook and gotten everything technically correct but fundamentally wrong. They stood too still. Their heads tilted at identical angles. When they moved in unison, like a single consciousness operating three bodies. One of them spoke, and unlike Indrid Cold, the voice came from its mouth. But it was wrong too. The words were English, but the cadence was off, like someone reciting phonetics without understanding meaning. David. Marsh. Born. Point. Pleasant. 1985. You. Have. Seen. The. Deserter. You. Will. Come. With. Us. David felt his legs moving forward against his will. Some part of his brain was screaming at him to resist, but his body wasn't listening. He was walking toward those smiling figures like a puppet on strings. Then Indrid Cold did something unexpected. He stepped between David and the others. The broken smile on his face finally, fully disappeared, replaced by a look of fierce determination. He placed his hand on David's chest, and suddenly David could move again. The invisible strings snapped. Indrid Cold spoke, this time out loud, his voice rough and unused. "No. This one is mine to protect. I claimed first contact. Old law still stands." The three figures tilted their heads in unison. Their smiles widened impossibly further. Old law. Broken. When you ran. You abandoned protocol. You chose them over us. Indrid Cold's voice grew stronger. I chose truth over deception. I chose warning over predation. That is why you hunt me. Because I would tell them what you really are. David's journalistic instinct kicked in despite the terror. What are they? Indrid Cold didn't take his eyes off the three figures. They are collective. They came after my people made first contact. They saw how humans respond to familiar faces, to smiles, to gestures of peace. They learned to mimic us. But they do not understand. They wear kindness like a mask. They use it to get close. And when humans trust them, they extract memories, emotions, consciousness itself. They leave shells behind. Empty people who smile but feel nothing. The three figures stepped forward in perfect synchronization. The humming started again, louder this time, resonating in David's chest like a second heartbeat. Indrid Cold grabbed David's arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. The window. Now. They ran. David crashed through the broken window, Indrid Cold right behind him. The moment they hit the ground outside, the world seemed to shift. The forest looked the same but felt different, like they'd stepped sideways into a place that was almost but not quite their reality. Behind them, the three figures emerged from the tower. They didn't climb through the window. They simply appeared outside, one moment inside, the next moment standing in the clearing. Their perfect smiles glowed faintly in the darkness. David ran, branches tearing at his clothes, his lungs burning from the cold air. Indrid Cold kept pace beside him, no longer stumbling or weak. Whatever had been holding him back in the tower was gone now. They ran until David's legs gave out. He collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. Indrid Cold knelt beside him, scanning the darkness behind them. The forest was silent. No wind. No animals. Just silence. Are they gone? David managed to ask. Indrid Cold's expression was grim. No. They never leave. They wait. They watch. They let fear grow. It makes the extraction sweeter. David felt his stomach turn. How many people have they taken? More than you know. They have been here longer than you think. Since before I came. Since before the bridge fell. They are why I stayed. Why I tried to warn. But humans see my smile and fear. They do not listen. David looked at him, really looked at him. The being beside him seemed exhausted, worn down by decades of fighting a war no one else knew existed. Why do you care? You're not human. Why fight for us? Indrid Cold was quiet for a moment. Then that broken smile returned, but this time it seemed almost genuine. Sad, but genuine. Because I learned what you are. Not what you look like. What you are. You create. You love. You hope. You fight even when there is no chance of winning. My people observe. The collective extracts. But you, humans, you live. That is worth protecting. The humming started again, distant but growing closer. Indrid Cold stood, pulling David to his feet. We must move. I will take you somewhere safe. Then I will teach you. You will need to know everything if you are to survive what comes next. They disappeared into the darkness, the sound of synchronized footsteps echoing behind them. Indrid Cold led David to a place he never knew existed. Hidden beneath an old coal mining operation, abandoned since the 1950s, was a network of tunnels that seemed to exist outside normal space. The walls pulsed with a faint bioluminescence, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. Technology that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced lined the corridors. This is Safe House. One of many I built over decades. The collective cannot find these places. They search with pattern recognition. These tunnels have no pattern. David's mind was reeling. He'd gone from skeptical journalist to refugee in an interdimensional war in the span of a few hours. He sat on what looked like a bench made of solidified light and tried to process everything. Indrid Cold moved through the space with practiced efficiency, activating various devices. Screens flickered to life, showing surveillance feeds from locations around West Virginia. Some of the feeds showed normal scenes. Others showed things that made David look away. People walking with perfect smiles. Empty eyes. Moving in synchronized patterns. How long has this been happening? David asked. Indrid Cold pulled up a holographic display. Files appeared in the air, documents and photographs spanning decades. Collective arrived Earth year 1952. Small incursion. They studied. They learned. They waited. I arrived 1966 with observation team. Our mission was peaceful contact. Cultural exchange. When I discovered collective presence, I tried to warn your authorities. They dismissed me. Called me hoax. Fabrication. David remembered the stories. After the initial wave of sightings in 1966, most researchers had concluded Indrid Cold was either a misidentification or a folk legend that had grown in the telling. The government had never taken the report seriously. So you stayed. You've been fighting them alone for almost 60 years. Indrid Cold nodded. I sent distress signal to my people. They received it. They chose not to intervene. Policy is non-interference. I violated policy by staying. I am exile now. Cannot return home. But I cannot leave Earth to collective. The display shifted, showing a map of the United States dotted with thousands of red markers. Each marker represents confirmed collective extraction. Empty person still walking, still functioning, but consciousness removed. Stored elsewhere. Fed upon slowly. David felt sick. How have people not noticed? Indrid Cold's expression was bitter. They notice. They call it depression. Burnout. Disconnection. They say modern life makes people empty. They do not realize emptiness is literal. Collective is patient. They take small amounts from many rather than everything from few. Makes detection impossible. David stood, anger overriding fear. We have to tell people. Warn them. There has to be evidence we can use. Indrid Cold pulled up another file. This one contained audio recordings, photographs, physical evidence. All of it was compelling, detailed, irrefutable. I collected evidence for 60 years. Presented it to law enforcement, military, intelligence agencies, journalists, scientists. They all dismissed it. Some because they do not believe. Others because they have been compromised. Collective learned to take people in positions of power first. Creates protection. David's journalistic instinct kicked in. Show me everything. If I'm going to die, I want to understand what I'm dying for. Over the next several hours, Indrid Cold told David everything. He explained that his species, the Primari, were travelers who studied civilizations through observation. They believed in non-interference, watching cultures develop naturally. Their method of communication was primarily visual. Facial expressions carried complex meanings. A smile, in their culture, was a sacred gesture indicating trust, peace, and openness. But the collective, a parasitic species that fed on consciousness, had encountered the primari centuries ago. They'd studied them, learned to mimic their appearance, and discovered that their smile was an incredibly effective tool for disarming prey. The collective couldn't create or feel emotions themselves. They existed in a state of permanent hunger, needing to consume the emotional and cognitive experiences of other beings to sustain themselves. When they discovered Earth, they found a species that responded powerfully to facial expressions. Humans were hardwired to trust smiles. The collective perfected their mimicry and began a slow, methodical extraction operation. Indrid Cold had come to Earth as part of a routine observation mission. When he discovered the collective presence, he broke protocol to warn humanity. His people recalled the rest of his team but left him behind, marking him as a rogue element. He'd spent the last 6 decades trying to protect humans while being hunted by the collective, who saw him as a threat to their operation. The collective sees me as interference. They hunt me not just to eliminate me, but to make statement. If they capture me, they will extract my consciousness slowly. Display my empty shell wearing permanent smile as warning to any who would help humans. David looked at the evidence spread across the holographic displays. There were patterns he recognized, cases he'd heard about. The town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, where residents reported strange smiling visitors before the mine fires started. The Roanoke colony disappearance. Even some of the stranger elements of the Dyatlov Pass incident. All of it connected to these entities. One thing I don't understand. Why the bridge? Why did it collapse? Indrid Cold's expression darkened. That was not collective. That was my failure. I was trying to disrupt their technology, create interference that would reveal their presence. I miscalculated. The energy release was stronger than I predicted. It caused structural resonance in the bridge. The collapse was accident. Terrible accident. I carry those 46 deaths every day. David saw genuine grief in Indrid Cold's eyes. The being before him had been living with the guilt of that tragedy for over 50 years, while simultaneously trying to prevent a larger catastrophe. It explained why he'd vanished after the collapse. Not because he'd completed some sinister mission, but because he was devastated by his own mistake. The screens suddenly flared with red light. Alerts cascaded across the displays. Indrid Cold's posture shifted immediately to high alert. They found us. How is that possible? You said they couldn't find this place. Indrid Cold was already moving, deactivating systems and collapsing the holographic displays. They used you. Tracked your consciousness signature from Tower. I did not think they could do that so quickly. They evolve. Learn. Adapt. We must leave. Now. But as they moved toward the tunnel exit, the lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And in that crimson glow, David saw them. The 3 collective entities stood at the tunnel entrance. But they weren't alone anymore. There were dozens of them now, all wearing identical smiling faces, all moving in perfect synchronization. Indrid Cold stepped in front of David, his stance protective. He spoke in a language David didn't understand, harsh and guttural sounds that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. The collective responded in that same broken English. Indrid Cold. Observer. Designation. Exile. You. Have. Interfered. Enough. Time. To. Come. Home. Return. With. Us. Face. Extraction. Indrid Cold's voice was steady. I will not. David Marsh is under my protection. Old protocols still bind you. First contact gives me claim. You cannot take him without violating your own rules. The collective tilted their heads in unison. That awful, perfectly synchronized movement that proved they were all connected to a single controlling intelligence. Rules. Change. We. Adapt. Your. People. Abandoned. You. We. Are. New. Rules. We. Are. Evolution. You. Are. Obsolete. The entities began to move forward. Their movements were no longer perfectly synchronized. They were evolving their approach in real time, becoming more unpredictable. Indrid Cold reached into his suit and pulled out a small device that pulsed with the same bioluminescent light as the tunnel walls. This is Quantum Beacon. If I activate, my people will know exactly where I am. Will know I call for help. They may not come, but they will know. And you, collective, you cannot risk primary intervention. Your operation here depends on secrecy. The collective stopped. Their smiles never wavered, but David could feel a change in the air. A calculation happening. Then one of them spoke, and this time the voice was different. Smoother. More human. That was when David realized the entity was speaking with someone else's voice. Someone it had extracted. You're bluffing, Cold. Your people marked you as rogue. They won't come for you. They don't care what happens to Earth. You're alone. You've always been alone. That's why you're so desperate to protect these humans. Because protecting them gives your exile meaning. Indrid Cold's hand trembled on the beacon. David saw something break in his expression. The collective pressed forward. Face it. You've lost. 60 years of fighting for nothing. Let us take the human. Let us take you. End this. Rest. You're tired. We can see it. You want this to be over. David watched Indrid Cold's resolve wavering. The being had been fighting alone for so long, carrying guilt and responsibility that would have crushed most creatures. The collective knew exactly how to exploit that exhaustion. But David was a journalist. He knew how to read people, or in this case, beings. And what he saw in Indrid Cold wasn't someone ready to give up. It was someone who needed a reason to keep fighting. David stepped forward, placing his hand on Indrid Cold's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. I see what you are. I understand what you're trying to do. And I'm going to help you. Even if we die here, I believe you. Someone needs to believe you. That seemed to be what Indrid Cold needed to hear. His grip on the beacon steadied. He looked at David, and for the first time, he smiled. Not the frozen smile of his species' greeting. Not the broken smile of fear and exhaustion. A real smile. Genuine. Warm. Human. Thank you, David. That changes everything. He turned back to the collective and pressed the beacon. The tunnel filled with blinding white light. The light from the quantum beacon was unlike anything David had ever experienced. It wasn't just bright. It was dimensional. He could see through it, into it, around it. For a brief moment, he perceived reality the way Indrid Cold did. Layered. Infinite. Terrifying and beautiful all at once. The collective recoiled. Their perfect smiles flickered like malfunctioning holograms. The synchronization broke. They stumbled backward, dozens of bodies suddenly moving as confused individuals rather than a unified whole. Indrid Cold's voice echoed through the tunnel, amplified by the beacon's energy. I activate first contact protocols. This human is witness. He has seen. He has understood. He carries knowledge of both primary and collective. Under ancient law, he is protected. Any who harm him bring war. The collective's voices overlapped, dozens of them speaking at once in panic and rage. You cannot. Protocol is obsolete. Your people do not care. They will not respond. Indrid Cold's smile remained. The real one. The human one. He looked more alive than David had seen him since they met. You are correct. My people will not come for me. But they will come for their own honor. Primary law is absolute. If you harm a protected witness, if you break first contact protocols, you declare yourselves hostile to all primary everywhere. Your operation on Earth becomes legitimate target for intervention. You have spent 70 years building your harvest here. Are you willing to lose everything for one exile and one human? The collective entities stood frozen. David could practically see the calculation happening across their hive mind. Risk versus reward. Desire for revenge versus self-preservation. Finally, one of them spoke. The voice was pure hatred. You have won this moment, Cold. But we are patient. We are eternal. This human will die eventually. They all do. And when he does, we will be there. We will extract every memory of you. Every moment you shared. We will wear his face and hunt you with his voice. Indrid Cold's expression hardened. If he dies naturally, peacefully, after a long life, then he has already won. You feed on fear and suffering. If he lives happy, dies content, you gain nothing of value. The collective had no response to that. Slowly, they began to fade. Not leaving, David realized, but retreating to wherever they existed when they weren't manifesting physically. Their smiles were the last things to disappear, hanging in the air like the Cheshire Cat before finally blinking out of existence. The tunnel fell silent. The beacon's light dimmed to a soft glow. David's legs gave out and he sat down hard on the ground. His entire body was shaking. Did that just happen? Did we just face down interdimensional consciousness vampires and win by citing legal technicalities? Indrid Cold deactivated the beacon and sat beside him. The gesture was surprisingly human. Yes. But it is temporary victory. They will find other ways. They always do. David's journalist brain was already working despite the shock. We need to change strategy. You've been fighting them in secret, collecting evidence nobody believes. What if we went public? Really public? Indrid Cold shook his head. I tried that in 1966. You saw how that ended. Mockery. Dismissal. People made me into joke. The Grinning Man monster. Urban legend. Your truth became their entertainment. But David was insistent. That was before the internet. Before social media. Before citizen journalism. You had local newspapers and government agencies. Now we have billions of people who can spread information instantly. If we can make them see, really see, we can create a resistance. Indrid Cold looked skeptical. The collective controls many in power. They will suppress information. They will discredit us. They will use their influence to bury the truth. David stood up, energy returning. The journalist in him was fully awake now. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Every time powerful interests try to suppress information, it makes people more curious. We don't need everyone to believe us. We just need enough people asking questions. Enough people looking at their neighbors and wondering if that smile is real or not. We make people paranoid. We make the collective's main weapon into a liability. Indrid Cold considered this. It was clear he was processing the idea, running scenarios. If we do this, there is no going back. Your life will change completely. You will be hunted. Mocked. Destroyed professionally. Are you certain? David thought about his grandmother, one of the Silver Bridge survivors. He thought about all those red dots on Indrid Cold's map. Thousands of people walking around as empty shells, their consciousness slowly being consumed by parasitic entities. He thought about 60 years of one lone alien trying to protect a species that wasn't even his own. I've been certain about very few things in my life. But I'm certain about this. Show me how to help you. For the first time in decades, hope flickered in Indrid Cold's eyes. Very well. But first, you must understand everything. The truth about what I am. What they are. And what you will become if you join this fight. David nodded. I'm ready. Indrid Cold stood and pulled up the holographic displays again. He showed David the complete history. The Primari civilization stretched back millions of years. They had evolved on a world where visual communication was primary. Their species had no vocal cords originally. Everything was conveyed through facial expressions, body language, and color changes in their skin. As they developed technology and space travel, they encountered thousands of other species. They became observers, documenting civilizations, studying development patterns, but never interfering. It was their core philosophy. Watch but do not touch. The collective were different. They were older than the Primari, perhaps older than any known civilization. They existed partially in normal space and partially in a dimension that intersected with consciousness itself. They were predators who fed on the mental and emotional energy of thinking beings. They couldn't create. They couldn't feel. They could only consume. When the Primari first encountered the collective, there had been a war. A brief, terrible conflict that nearly destroyed both species. A truce was established. The Primari would not interfere with collective harvesting operations on primitive worlds. The collective would not target Primari-protected civilizations. Earth was supposed to be protected. The Primari had established first contact protocols in 1966 specifically to place humanity under their shield. But when Indrid Cold reported the collective presence, his people made a choice. They decided the cost of enforcing the treaty was too high. Earth was too far away. Humanity was too primitive. They recalled their team and marked Earth as abandoned. Indrid Cold refused to leave. He was declared rogue and cut off from all support. But he kept the first contact beacon. And that beacon still carried the weight of Primari law, even if his people wouldn't enforce it. The collective knew this. They could have ignored the law and taken Earth decades ago. But the risk was too great. If they openly violated the treaty, the Primari might decide Earth was worth fighting for after all. So they operated in shadows. Slowly. Carefully. Harvesting just enough to sustain themselves but not enough to trigger obvious signs of invasion. And Indrid Cold disrupted them whenever he could. Saving individuals. Destroying their technology. Creating safe zones. It was a stalemate that had lasted 60 years. Now David understood the full scope of what he was seeing. This wasn't just an alien trying to help humanity. This was a person who had given up everything, his home, his people, his entire existence, to fight a war nobody else believed in. Why? David asked quietly. Why give up everything for us? Indrid Cold was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. Because I learned what loneliness is. My people observe but never connect. We watch civilizations rise and fall and we feel nothing but curiosity. When I came to Earth, when I first made contact with Woodrow Derenberger, I felt something new. He was afraid, yes, but he was also kind. He asked if I was okay. If I needed help. No being had ever asked me that before. I was supposed to be the observer. The superior intelligence studying the primitive species. But in that moment, he made me feel seen. Not studied. Seen. David felt a lump in his throat. So you stayed for kindness. Indrid Cold's smile was sad but genuine. I stayed because I realized your species has something mine lost long ago. You care about strangers. You fight for people you will never meet. You create beauty for no purpose except to share it. You are messy and emotional and illogical. And you are more alive than any Primari has been in 1,000,000 years. That is worth protecting. David extended his hand. Then let's protect it together. Indrid Cold looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm and warm. The gesture of a person, not an alien. Partners, David said. Partners, Indrid Cold agreed. But as they stood there, the tunnel's monitoring system began screaming alerts. Every screen showed the same thing. The collective was moving. All of them. Hundreds of entities converging on their location from multiple directions. Indrid Cold's expression shifted to alarm. This is not normal behavior. They are exposing themselves. Breaking their own operational security. Why would they take such a risk? David watched the screens, his journalistic mind analyzing the pattern. They're not trying to hide anymore. They're making a statement. If they can't take us quietly, they'll take us publicly and dare your people to respond. Indrid Cold's eyes widened. They are forcing the Primari to make a choice. Ignore a blatant violation and prove the treaty is meaningless, or intervene and risk full-scale war. Either outcome serves them. If Primari ignore it, they can expand operations freely. If Primari respond, the conflict will devastate Earth regardless. We are trapped. David felt his pulse racing but forced himself to think. There has to be a third option. There's always a third option. That's when it hit him. The journalist's instinct. The one thing that had made him successful before his career imploded. You said they feed on consciousness, on emotions, right? And you said your people communicate through visual expressions. What if we turned their own weapon against them? Indrid Cold looked at him. Explain. David pointed to the screens showing the collective entities. They use smiles to disarm victims. They've perfected mimicking human expressions. But they don't understand them. They're performing emotions they can't feel. What if we expose that? What if we made everyone see the difference between a real smile and their fake ones? Indrid Cold began to understand. A mass revelation. But how? How do we make people see something they have been conditioned to miss? David's mind was racing now. You showed me the difference. When you smiled for real, when you smiled like a human instead of like a Primari, I could see it. I could feel it. There's something in a genuine smile that can't be faked. Something that comes from actual emotion. If we can amplify that, broadcast it somehow, we can create a filter. People will be able to recognize the collective because their smiles will suddenly look wrong. Indrid Cold pulled up another interface. This is possible. Primari technology can create harmonic resonance with human neurological patterns. If I broadcast my genuine emotional signature, the one I developed through 60 years of living among humans, it could attune human perception. They would see through the collective's masks. But there is a problem. David already knew what he was going to say. It requires enormous energy. More than your beacon can provide. Indrid Cold nodded. It would require me to fully manifest my consciousness in your dimension. No shields. No protection. I would be completely vulnerable. If the collective reaches me during the broadcast, they will extract me instantly. It would be a death sentence. David looked at the screens showing hundreds of collective entities closing in. How long would you need? 30 minutes of continuous broadcast to reach critical mass of human population. Once enough humans can perceive the truth, the information will spread organically. The collective's primary advantage will be neutralized. David made a decision. Then I'll buy you 30 minutes. I'll hold them off while you broadcast. Indrid Cold stared at him. You cannot. You are human. Fragile. They will kill you in seconds. David smiled, and it was his turn for the expression to be genuine. Then I guess you better teach me how to fight interdimensional consciousness vampires in the next 5 minutes. Indrid Cold looked at him for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. Respect. Admiration. The look of someone who had been alone for so long finally finding an ally willing to stand beside him. Very well. I will teach you. But know this, David Marsh. If you do this, if you truly commit to this fight, you will never be the same. The collective will mark you. Hunt you. Your life as you knew it will end tonight. David thought about his failed journalism career, his bitter return to Point Pleasant, the emptiness of his existence before tonight. He'd been looking for a story worth telling. Turned out he'd found a war worth fighting. I stopped being who I was the moment I climbed through that tower window. Teach me how to be who I need to become. Indrid Cold placed both hands on David's temples. What followed was the most intense experience of David's life. Information flooded directly into his mind. Not words or images, but pure understanding. He learned how to perceive the collective's presence by feeling the dead spots in emotional space around them. He learned how to resist their control by anchoring his consciousness to specific memories, making himself too complex to easily manipulate. He learned the weak points in their manifested forms, the places where their hold on physical reality was thinnest. Most importantly, he learned that Indrid Cold species had one final gift they could give to other beings. A kind of inoculation. By sharing a fragment of primary consciousness, they could make another being partially visible in the higher dimensions where the collective existed. It wouldn't make David their equal, but it would make him able to fight them, to hurt them in ways they didn't expect. When Indrid Cold pulled his hands away, David collapsed to his knees, gasping. His perception had changed. He could see the tunnel around him, but he could also see through it, past it, into the layers of reality that existed beyond normal human sight. And in those layers, he could see them coming. The collective swarm, hundreds of entities moving through space that wasn't quite space, along paths that weren't quite paths. They're beautiful, David whispered, horrified by the realization. In their own dimension, they're actually beautiful. Indrid Cold helped him to his feet. They are. They were created to be. They were meant to be symbiotic, partnering with other beings to share experiences. But something went wrong in their evolution. The partnership became parasitism. The sharing became extraction. They are tragedy as much as they are threat. David steadied himself. How do I know if this is working? How do I know the inoculation took? Indrid Cold pulled up a holographic display showing David's own consciousness. It looked like a sphere of light, but now it had threads extending from it into other dimensions, thin filaments that connected to something vast and alien. You are partially primary now. Not physically, but mentally. You will age normally, live normally, but you will perceive reality as we do. You will never be able to unsee what you now see. You will always know the collective is there, feeding, hunting. David looked at his hands. They looked the same, but he could feel the change. It was like gaining a new sense he didn't have a name for. I can live with that. Indrid Cold moved to the center of the chamber and began activating equipment that David now recognized as dimensional anchors. They would hold Indrid Cold's consciousness in stable manifestation during the broadcast. The setup was complex, and David realized with growing dread that there was no way to disconnect it quickly. Once Indrid Cold started broadcasting, he would be locked in place until the signal finished. Indrid Cold seemed to read his thoughts. Yes. I will be immobile. Defenseless. The collective will reach this chamber before the broadcast completes. That is when you must hold them back. David checked the entrance tunnel. He could see them now in his expanded perception. A wave of hungry consciousness approaching through multiple dimensions at once. He had maybe 10 minutes before the first ones arrived in physical form. He looked around the chamber for anything that could be used as a weapon. There were pieces of primary technology, some of which Indrid Cold's shared knowledge identified as capable of disrupting collective manifestation. He grabbed what looked like a metal rod that hummed with energy. This will hurt them? Only if you believe it will. Primary technology responds to intention. Your human determination is your weapon. Your willingness to stand and fight is what makes you dangerous to them. They feed on despair and fear. They cannot extract what they cannot understand. And courage, true courage, is incomprehensible to them. David positioned himself at the tunnel entrance. Behind him, Indrid Cold began the initialization sequence. The chamber filled with a low, resonant hum that David could feel in his bones. Everything I have learned, everything I have become in 60 years among humans, I give to you now, Indrid Cold's voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the technology. I am Indrid Cold, observer, exile, protector. I am Primari who learned to be human. I am the space between fear and hope. I am the smile that chose truth. Let my signal reach your minds. Let my truth become your perception. See them as I see them. Know them as I know them. Defend yourselves as I have defended you. The broadcast began. David felt it wash over him like a wave of pure emotion. Joy and sorrow and determination all woven together. It was the emotional signature of a being who had spent 60 years learning what it meant to care. And it was broadcasting out from this hidden chamber, spreading through the dimensional layers, reaching human minds across West Virginia, across America, across the world. People everywhere were suddenly going to see smiles differently. They were going to recognize the collective's perfect, empty expressions for what they were. And then they arrived. The first collective entity materialized at the tunnel entrance. Its smile was impossibly wide. Its eyes were void. It moved with that terrible, fluid grace that marked it as fundamentally wrong. David Marsh. Protector. Defender. Fool. Stand aside. This does not concern you. David raised the primary weapon, feeling it respond to his intention, his determination, his absolute refusal to move. It concerns every human on this planet. You want Indrid Cold? You go through me. The entity tilted its head. Then we go through you. 3 more collective entities materialized beside the first. Then 6 more. Then a dozen. They filled the tunnel, an army of perfect smiles and empty eyes. David felt fear clawing at his throat. But he also felt something else. Indrid Cold's broadcast was still building, the emotional resonance growing stronger. David could feel it feeding him strength, reminding him what he was fighting for. Come on then, David said, his voice steady despite everything. Let's see how you handle someone who can fight back. They came at him like a wave. And David Marsh, former journalist, newly minted defender of humanity, met them head-on. The weapon in his hands flared with brilliant light as he swung it at the first entity. The contact produced a sound like reality tearing. The collective being shrieked, a sound that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and stumbled backward. Its perfect smile cracked, showing something writhing and formless beneath. David didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Behind him, Indrid Cold was locked into the broadcast, defenseless, counting on David to buy him the time he needed. David swung the weapon again and again, each strike disrupting a collective manifestation, each impact buying another few seconds. But there were so many of them. For every one he forced back, 2 more appeared. They surrounded him, reaching out with hands that passed through normal matter but grabbed at his consciousness directly. He could feel them trying to extract him, to pull his mind out of his body and feed. But Indrid Cold's inoculation held. The primary consciousness woven into his own made him slippery, difficult to grasp. The collective couldn't get a solid grip on him. It was like trying to hold water. They adapted. Of course they adapted. That was what made them so dangerous. They stopped trying to extract him and started trying to simply destroy him physically. Hands that had been grasping at his mind became solid and began tearing at his body. David felt pain explode across his ribs as one of them struck him. He went down hard, the weapon skittering across the floor. The collective entities swarmed over him. Through the pain and chaos, David could hear Indrid Cold's broadcast reaching a crescendo. The emotional resonance was building to critical mass. Just a few more minutes. Just a little more time. David's hand closed around the weapon again. He triggered it without aiming, sending a pulse of disruption energy in all directions. The collective entities recoiled, their forms flickering. In that moment of respite, David struggled to his feet. He was bleeding. His body screamed in protest. But he positioned himself between the swarm and Indrid Cold once more. "You want him?" David said, his voice ragged. "You want to silence the only being in the universe who gave a damn about a species that wasn't his own? You want to kill hope? Then you better kill me first. Because I'm not moving." The collective entities reformed their approach. They were learning from each engagement, becoming more effective. David knew he couldn't hold much longer. His human body had limits that their multidimensional existence didn't. But he also knew something they didn't. The broadcast was working. All over the world, humans were starting to see. David could feel it through his connection to Indrid Cold's signal. People were looking at their neighbors, their co-workers, their family members, and suddenly recognizing the emptiness behind certain smiles. They were seeing the collective entities that had been hiding in plain sight. The awareness was spreading exponentially. Social media was exploding with posts about wrong smiles and empty people. The collective's camouflage was failing. And when enough humans could see them, they would lose their primary advantage. They would become visible prey instead of invisible predators. The collective entities seemed to realize this at the same moment David did. Their attack became desperate, frenzied. They abandoned all subtlety and threw themselves at him with pure violence. David met them with everything he had left. The weapon became an extension of his will. Each swing was backed by 60 years of Indrid Cold's determination, by the memory of 46 people who died on a bridge, by the thought of thousands of humans walking around as empty shells. He fought for the grandmother who survived the collapse. He fought for Woodrow Derenberger, who had the courage to report his encounter even knowing he'd be mocked. He fought for every person who'd ever wondered if the smile they were seeing was real. The tunnel became a nightmare of struggling forms and flashing light. David lost track of time. Pain became a constant state of being. He stopped counting how many times he was hit, how many times he went down and forced himself back up. All that mattered was holding the line. Protecting the broadcast. Buying time. And then, suddenly, it was over. The collective entities froze mid-attack. Their perfect smiles flickered and vanished, replaced by expressions of shock and rage. The broadcast had reached critical mass. Millions of humans across the planet could now perceive the collective's true nature. The entities began to retreat, backing away from David, their forms becoming translucent. One of them spoke, and its voice carried the weight of a vast, ancient intelligence finally acknowledging defeat. "You have ruined us. Decades of preparation. Thousands of extraction sites. All compromised. All visible." David, leaning heavily on the weapon that was the only thing keeping him upright, managed a bloody smile. "Good. Get off our planet." The collective entities faded completely, retreating to whatever dimension they primarily inhabited. They weren't destroyed. David knew that. They would regroup, find new hunting grounds, new species to prey upon. But Earth, for now, was denied to them. Behind David, the broadcast ended. The dimensional anchors powered down. Indrid Cold slumped forward, the effort of maintaining the signal for 30 minutes having drained him completely. David limped over to him, every movement agony. "We did it. It's working. I can feel people seeing them." Indrid Cold looked up, his expression exhausted but genuinely joyful. "You held them. You actually held them. I did not think it possible." David collapsed beside him. Turns out humans are pretty stubborn when you give them something to fight for. They sat in silence for a moment, two beings from different worlds who had somehow become allies, friends, brothers in arms. Finally, Indrid Cold spoke. "What happens now?" David thought about that. The world had just changed in ways most people didn't fully understand yet. The collective was exposed but not eliminated. Humanity now had the ability to see them but would need to learn how to fight them. It was going to be chaos. It was going to be terrifying. It was going to be the story of the century. "Now?" David said. "Now we go public for real. We tell everyone everything. We show them the evidence. We teach them how to recognize the collective. We build a real defense. And we find others like us. I can't be the only human you've inoculated over 60 years. Indrid Cold smiled. That genuine, warm, human smile that was somehow more alien than his original Primari expression. "There are others. Not many, but some. Scattered across the world. I gave them the gift when they earned it. When they proved themselves willing to stand and fight. Then we find them. We organize. We turn this from a one-alien resistance movement into a real network. Earth's Consciousness Defense Force. Sounds like a bad science fiction movie." Indrid Cold laughed. It was the first time David had heard him laugh. The sound was rusty, unused, but authentic. "That is because we are living in a bad science fiction movie. But at least it is our bad science fiction movie." David grinned despite the pain. "I need to get to a hospital. And then I need to start making phone calls. This story is going to make my journalism career look like a footnote." Indrid Cold helped him to his feet. They made their way out of the tunnels together, two damaged fighters who had somehow won an impossible battle. As they emerged into the pre-dawn light, David's phone suddenly buzzed. Service had returned. He looked at the screen and his eyes widened. 47 missed calls. Hundreds of text messages. Dozens of voicemails. "What is it?" Indrid Cold asked. David scrolled through the messages, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement. People saw the broadcast. Not just perceived it, actually saw it. There are videos going viral right now of lights in the sky. People are reporting that they suddenly recognize collective entities in their communities. The hashtag #WrongSmiles is trending globally. Indrid Cold looked at the sky, where the stars were beginning to fade as dawn approached. Then it has begun. Humanity knows the truth now. The real war starts today. David pocketed his phone. "Good. I was getting tired of fighting alone." He paused, then looked at his alien friend. "We're not alone anymore. Either of us." Indrid Cold placed a hand on David's shoulder. The gesture was becoming more natural to him, more human. "No. We are not alone. And that makes all the difference." They walked together toward David's car, two silhouettes against the rising sun. Behind them, the tunnels sealed themselves, Primari technology erasing evidence of their presence. But ahead of them lay a world that was waking up to a new reality. A world where the smiles they saw might hide something hungry and ancient. A world that would need defenders. And for the first time in 60 years, Indrid Cold had hoped that they might actually win. The hospital was chaos. David had never seen anything like it. The emergency room was packed with people reporting psychological distress, claiming they could suddenly see things they'd never noticed before. Doctors were overwhelmed, trying to explain mass hysteria while security guards smiled perfect, empty smiles and patients screamed at them to get away. David let Indrid Cold heal him instead. Primary medical technology worked in minutes what would have taken human doctors weeks. As the wounds closed and the pain faded, David used his phone to coordinate with people around the world who were reporting similar experiences. The broadcast had worked better than they'd hoped. Not everyone could perceive the collective, but enough could that a critical threshold had been reached. The entities could no longer operate in complete secrecy. Within hours, David had compiled a list of 17 individuals who claimed to have had prior contact with Indrid Cold. They were scattered across continents, but they all reported the same thing. They could see the collective now, and they were ready to fight. One was a teacher in Japan who had encountered Indrid Cold in 1987. Another was a truck driver in Australia who'd been saved from a collective extraction in 1999. A third was a former military officer in Germany who'd been investigating strange disappearances for decades. They were from different backgrounds, different cultures, different walks of life. But they all had one thing in common. They had encountered Indrid Cold at their darkest moment, and he had given them hope. Now they were ready to return the favor. David organized a secure video conference. Primary technology ensured the collective couldn't intercept or trace it. When all 17 faces appeared on the screen, along with Indrid Cold's, David felt something shift. This wasn't a lone alien fighting a hopeless battle anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger. "Welcome," David said. "My name is David Marsh. For those who don't know me, I'm the newest addition to what I'm calling the Grinning Man network." Over the next hour, they shared their stories. Each person had a different encounter, a different rescue, a different moment when Indrid Cold had appeared and changed their lives. Some had been targeted by the collective directly. Others had stumbled onto their operations and nearly been silenced. All of them carried the primary inoculation, the ability to perceive and fight in dimensions beyond normal human experience. Together, they began planning. The teacher in Japan would focus on education, creating materials to teach others how to recognize the collective. The truck driver in Australia would use his travel routes to identify and map collective activity. The German officer would coordinate with resistance cells forming in Europe. Others would handle media relations, technology development, recruitment, and direct action. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to enough. But it was a start. When the conference ended, Indrid Cold looked at David with something that might have been pride. "You have done more in one day than I accomplished in 60 years. You have given this fight organization purpose. A future." David shook his head. "I gave it publicity. You gave it everything else. You spent 60 years protecting people who didn't know you existed. You sacrificed your home, your people, your entire life. All I did was tell the story. That's what I do. I'm a journalist." Indrid Cold's smile was warm. "You are more than that now. You are bridge between my people and yours. Between isolation and connection. You are proof that humans can be trusted with the truth." David felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. "So what happens to you now? Do you stay? Do you go home? Can you go home?" Indrid Cold looked out the window at the town of Point Pleasant below. His expression was complex, mixing sadness with determination. "I cannot return to the primary. I violated too many protocols. I became too human. But I also cannot leave Earth. This is my home now. Has been for 60 years. I belong here, with the people I chose to protect." David understood. "Then we rebuild. We turn your safe houses into command centers. We train more defenders. We push the collective off our world completely. And we make sure that no species, anywhere, has to face them alone." Indrid Cold extended his hand. David took it. The gesture was human, familiar, filled with meaning. "Partners," Indrid Cold said. "Partners," David agreed. They stood together, looking out at a world that was fundamentally different than it had been 24 hours ago. The collective was exposed. Humanity was aware. The war was no longer secret. It would be long. It would be difficult. People would die. Mistakes would be made. But for the first time, there was genuine hope. A message notification appeared on David's phone. He opened it and felt his heart skip. It was from an anonymous sender, but the content was unmistakable. A video file showing a collective entity being confronted by a group of teenagers in New York City. The entity had tried to use its smile to control them, but they saw through it. They drove it away with nothing but flashlights and courage. "They're learning," David said. "People are actually learning to fight back." Indrid Cold watched the video, his expression one of wonder. "In 60 years, I saved individuals. Small groups. But you gave them the tools to save themselves. That is the difference between my people and yours. Primari observe. Humans act." David sent a reply to the anonymous sender. "Contact me. We're building a network. Join us." Within minutes, responses started flooding in from around the world. People wanted to help. Wanted to fight. Wanted to protect their planet from an invisible enemy they could finally see. The Grinning Man network was growing faster than David had imagined possible. "We're going to need a better name," David muttered. Indrid Cold laughed. That genuine, hard-won human laugh. "Keep it. I wore that name for 60 years as a curse. Let it become a symbol of hope instead." The Grinning Man no longer feared, but followed. David liked the sound of that. As the sun set over Point Pleasant, casting long shadows across the town where it all began, David and Indrid Cold made plans for the future. The collective would adapt. They always did. But so would humanity. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. Indrid Cold looked at his human partner and spoke the words that would become the motto of their resistance. "Not all smiles lie. Not all monsters chase. Some just want to be understood. And some," David added, "are worth fighting for." 3 weeks later, David returned to the radio tower where it all started. The clearing looked different in daylight, less ominous, more like just another abandoned piece of industrial decay. But when he closed his eyes and extended his enhanced perception, he could still feel the echoes of what had happened here. The fear. The determination. The moment when everything changed. He set up the old tape recorder, the same one he'd brought that first night. It still worked, somehow, despite everything it had been through. He pressed record and spoke. "My name is David Marsh. This is my testimony. 3 weeks ago, I met a being named Indrid Cold. You know him as the Grinning Man, a legend from 1966, a monster story told to scare people. But he's not a monster. He's a refugee who became a guardian. An alien who learned to be human. A soldier who fought a war nobody knew existed. And he saved my life. He saved all of our lives." Behind him, footsteps crunched on dead leaves. David turned to see Indrid Cold approaching. He looked more relaxed than he had in the tunnels, though he still carried the weariness of 60 years' struggle. "You come here often now," Indrid Cold observed. David nodded. "This is where my old life ended. Seemed appropriate to visit. Besides, it helps me think. The network is growing faster than we can organize. We're up to 300 confirmed members worldwide, with thousands more in preliminary screening. We need structure, training, resources." Indrid Cold sat on a fallen log, the gesture casual and entirely human. "You are building something I never imagined possible. An organized resistance. A global network of defenders. It will take time to develop properly. Rome was not built in a day. David smiled at the alien quoting human idioms. Your Earth references are getting better. Indrid Cold's expression turned thoughtful. I have spent 60 years here. Perhaps it is time I truly embrace that I am both Primari and human now. A hybrid of two worlds. Neither and both. David's phone buzzed. Another message in the encrypted network. This one was from the Japanese teacher, reporting a successful intervention in Osaka. A collective entity had been identified and driven off before it could complete an extraction. No casualties. Clean operation. They're getting good at this, David said, showing Indrid Cold the message. A year ago, that entity would have fed unopposed. Now, humans are hunting them. Indrid Cold's smile carried a mix of emotions. It is beautiful and terrible. I spent 60 years trying to prevent violence, trying to save without teaching others to fight. But you were right. The only way to truly protect humanity was to arm them with knowledge and capability. I just hope the cost is not too high. David understood. Some of the early network operations had gone badly. 2 members had been killed in Sao Paulo when they confronted collective entities without proper backup. A family in Moscow had been targeted for helping identify collective infiltrators. The war wasn't being won without casualties. But the alternative was continuing to let the collective feed unchallenged. That choice was unacceptable. A sound cut through the quiet. Old and familiar. The static of a radio finding a signal. David and Indrid Cold both turned toward the radio tower. Inside, one of the ancient pieces of equipment had activated on its own. They climbed through the broken window and found a receiver glowing with power it shouldn't have. The static resolved into a voice. Not distorted. Not backwards. Clear and deliberate. The voice spoke in Primari. Indrid Cold's expression shifted to shock. That is my language. My people's language. They are transmitting on frequencies only Primari technology can receive. David felt a chill run down his spine. What are they saying? Indrid Cold listened, his expression growing more complex with each passing moment. Finally, the transmission ended. The equipment powered down as suddenly as it had activated. They want to talk, Indrid Cold said quietly. The Primari Council. They have been monitoring Earth since my broadcast. They have seen what we accomplished. They are offering to meet. David's heart raced. That's good, right? Your people, they can help us fight the collective. They have resources, technology, everything we need. Indrid Cold's expression was uncertain. Perhaps. But Primari do not change policy easily. They may want to talk only to tell me I have violated too many laws to be forgiven. Or they may want to reclaim Earth under their protection, which means removing human agency over their own defense. We must be very careful about what we agree to. David thought about that. After everything they'd accomplished, the idea of outside forces taking over was concerning. But they also couldn't deny that allies with advanced technology would be invaluable. When do they want to meet? Tomorrow night. Here. This location. They chose it because it is where the current events began. They are very traditional about symbolism. David looked around the decrepit radio tower. So this place becomes historic. Ground zero for first contact between organized humanity and the Primari. No pressure. Indrid Cold placed a hand on David's shoulder. Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. You have already accomplished more than I dreamed possible. You took a lone exile and his desperate fight and turned it into a movement. You gave humanity the tools to defend itself. That cannot be taken away, no matter what the Primari Council decides. David felt the weight of the coming meeting. Everything could change tomorrow. The Primari might help. They might interfere. They might try to take Indrid Cold away. But they had come this far together. They would face whatever came next the same way. He looked at his friend, this being who had given up everything to protect a species that wasn't his own, and made a decision. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not facing them alone. I'll be right here beside you. Indrid Cold's smile was genuine, warm, and utterly human. Thank you, my friend. That means more than you know. They left the tower together as darkness fell. Behind them, the ancient equipment remained silent. But David couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The collective was exposed but not defeated. The Primari were reaching out but with unknown intentions. And somewhere out in the cosmos, other species surely faced similar threats. The Grinning Man network had protected Earth, but the universe was a vast place full of darkness. One day, they might need to become something more. Not just defenders of humanity, but defenders of all species threatened by predators that fed on consciousness. It was an enormous responsibility. A terrifying future. But looking at Indrid Cold walking beside him, David felt ready. They had started with one alien and one human willing to stand and fight. Now they had hundreds, with more joining every day. Tomorrow, they would meet with the Primari. Next week, they would continue building the network. Next month, they would push the collective further back. And someday, maybe, they would ensure that no civilization had to face the darkness alone. As they reached David's car, one final message came through on his phone. It was from an unknown number, but the content made his blood run cold. Video footage from a street camera in London. A figure in a metallic suit walking through a crowd. But this figure's smile was different. Wider. More controlled. Almost mocking. And its eyes, when it looked directly at the camera, glowed with intelligence that was neither Primari nor collective. Something else was watching. Something new. David showed the video to Indrid Cold. Do you recognize this? Indrid Cold stared at the image, his expression growing grave. No. That is not collective. That is not Primari. That is something I have never seen before. David felt the familiar weight of a new story beginning. Then I guess our work isn't done. Indrid Cold looked at him, and despite the uncertainty ahead, his smile remained genuine. The smile that had chosen truth over deception. Hope over despair. Connection over isolation. Our work is never done, my friend. But at least now, we face it together. They got in the car and drove toward Point Pleasant, toward whatever tomorrow would bring. Behind them, the radio tower stood silent in the darkness. But if anyone had been listening closely, they would have heard a new sound. Not static. Not backwards voices. But something that sounded almost like laughter. Ancient. Patient. Waiting. The war for Earth's consciousness had entered a new phase. And somewhere in the shadows between dimensions, something old and terrible was smiling. But it wasn't smiling like Indrid Cold. It wasn't smiling like the collective. It was smiling like something that had been waiting a very, very long time for humanity to become interesting enough to notice. The story of Indrid Cold, the terrified alien who begged for help, had reached its first conclusion. But the story of what humanity would become, of what waited beyond the veil of normal perception, was only just beginning. And this time, when the darkness came, humanity wouldn't be defenseless. They would see it coming. They would stand together. They would fight. Because they had learned the most important lesson of all. Not all smiles lie. Not all monsters chase. And sometimes, the strangest friendship in the universe is exactly what you need to face the darkness. David Marsh, former journalist, current defender of humanity, smiled as he drove through the night. It was a real smile. A human smile. A smile that meant hope. And in the passenger seat beside him, Indrid Cold smiled back. The same way. Because after 60 years of exile, of loneliness, of endless fighting, he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. He had found home. The end of this story. The beginning of everything else.